When it comes to the Urahara fashion movement, there are no short of names that should be celebrated, but there are a few that changed the course of fashion forever. So today we celebrate them, and a starting point for going deeper into the history of the Urahara fashion era. I'm Reggie Casual, this is WTH, and this is the intro. So the first on our list is Hikaru Iwanagi, most known for starting the label Bounty Hunter in 1995. Hikaru not only came up at around the same time as the world famous individuals that you all know, Fujiwara and Nigo, but he was also part of the reason why the Urahara fashion movement became what it was. A mishmash of ideas and inspirations that derived from a mixture of US and UK subcultures. Taking on a more punk ethos, Hikaru's often black-laden palette for fashion had Bounty Hunter stand out amongst the more colorful trappings that appealed to a large, massive group during the time. That aside, Iwanagi's biggest contribution came in the form of a collaboration. After being introduced by Nigo to Brian Donnelly, or as most know him as, KAWS, Iwanagi set forth on a collaboration that shook the international market and started the legend that is KAWS as we know it. This tiny, at the time, collaboration birthed the KAWS companion figure. And we all know how that turned out. And that's right, KAWS made his first huge break in Japan. So without Iwanagi's interest and willingness to collaborate with an American artist, the landscape would most certainly be much different today. Ryo Ishikawa comes next, and while not as well known as others on this list, he is no doubt one of the most important. Another friend of Fujiwara, Ishikawa's biggest contribution to the Urahara was his label Vanquish that he started in 2005. Now, that may seem a little late and well out of the purview of classic Urahara, but Ishikawa is a bit of a strange case. He became an independent designer in 1999, and when deciding to open Vanquish, he positioned it not as a Urahara label, but a Shibuya label, which makes him being on this list a bit different as he isn't Urahara classic per se, but Ishikawa's Vanquish highlighted the culture of Shibuya. Classic Urahara was big, oversized, boisterous. Shibuya was gritty, alternative, almost seedy in a way. Vanquish was positioned as a brand that attracted the men of Shibuya, known for their slimmer and alternative punk-influenced silhouette. The brand Vanquish became a hit and has since been a staple of that style for an affordable price. Fujiwara even has an infrequent collaboration with Vanquish dubbed Denim by Vanquish and Fragment. Later, Ishikawa would start FR2, a Harajuku-based label, and it has since become an international hit. 1997 was a year that many who follow Japanese fashion will live in infamy. It was the year one of the first luxury street brands was formed in the visage of a skull with crossbones. That brand was Mastermind Japan, founded by Masaki Honma. A former Yohji Yamamoto sales associate, Honma had this crazy idea of making a street-based label, clad in black, and made with the same materials as the high-end brands he was surrounded by. This meant cashmere t-shirts, leather pants and jackets, and gabardine layered pants. It was a big departure from the mid-market at the time, as most Urahara brands, while expensive, were not even touching the price point of Mastermind. Honma was hugely successful with this label, as nobody had really employed this methodology before. And his reasoning was basically, there's a whole bunch of wealthy young people that still want something high-end, but don't want to steer too far away from their peers. And it worked. Since then, Mastermind has grown into a classic Urahara staple with numerous collaborations, a pedigree that continues to prevail to this day, and it sits pretty as the Hood by Air off-white predecessor that still has a sizable fan base. Next, we have Takahiro Miyashita, who most of us know has moved on to greener and independent pastures with his namesake label, Takahiro Miyashita the Soloist. But to say his first forays into fashion didn't bring him into legendary status is an understatement. Takahiro Miyashita started the now infamous and repeatedly copied No. 9, which set not just Japan but Europe and later underground American fashion movements ablaze with its almost as pure as you can make it take on the classic punk aesthetic. In a world where all that was being replaced by the incoming wave of popularity, which is the hip-hop infused style, Miyashita never wavered until 2009, where his partnership with his investor ended. Since then, Miyashita is better seen on the runway with his eponymous label, and while it's impressive, it never quite caught the same magic that number 9 did. Next is Tetsu Nishiyama, founder of both 40% Against Rights and WTAPS, but before that was a long partner of Shinsuke Takizawa, who will most certainly be on this list later. Having an affinity towards classic Americana and mentored by Fujiwara as well, Nishiyama carved his path in a more unique way. While working with Takizawa, Nishiyama started Neighborhood, which was at first an Americana vintage shop. Himself enamored with military garb and fatigues in the social war between the conservative government and the largely liberal youth, had him start 40% Against Rights in 1993, a largely graphic-laden label with messages that basically challenged the traditional power structure. In 1996, WTAPS fully realized 40% Against Rights' vision by making statements that were military-inspired. Full stop. Fatigues and military fabrics used to create a sort of uniform for the youth to showcase a stand against abusive government practices. Needless to say, WTAPS became a hit among those who loved the aesthetic, and the label went on to do countless collabs with Japanese and Western brands alike. And while Nishiyama is not often spoken in the same vein as, say, Nigo, his contributions to the movement are no less important to establishing the many styles of the Urahara. Fittingly, Shinsuke Takizawa is next, most known for the label Neighborhood, which he started along with Nishiyama in 1994. Another mentee of Fujiwara, Takizawa was interested in all things punk and Americana growing up. Military, motorcycles, and of course denim being his main draw in fashion. But what many may not know is music and design was where Takizawa found himself. After going on a student exchange to London in the 1980s, Takizawa returned to Japan and joined up with Fujiwara to start the record label Major Force, in which he did the graphics for. After telling Fujiwara his interest in fashion, Fujiwara then urged him to take up the craft. This led to Neighborhood, and after dabbling in vintage sales, he would eventually set out to make his own pair of denim jeans, and what would happen next is nothing short of a miracle. Neighborhood's attention to detail and high-crafted approach became the catalyst of a wave of interest in Japanese fashion. This wave made its way from Hong Kong, where Neighborhood till this day has a very big reputation, as it was one of the first brands Kevin Ma would talk about on his then growing platform, Hypebeast. The heat from Neighborhood would naturally make its way out west, with Neighborhood continuing to make waves in fashion. In the spirit of the next individual, not a lot will be said, but his contributions to the movement are so magnanimous that it would be nearly sacrilegious not to mention him. The often hidden from view Skate Thing is likely one of the most enigmatic figures in Japanese fashion. He's never shown his face publicly, rarely talks to anyone besides friends in interviews, and even with all that has created some of the most recognizable images from the era. He designed images and graphics for Billionaire Boys Club, Ice Cream, and of course is not only responsible for the Bape logo, but coming up with the concept of Bape with Nigo, full stop. Oh, and he also started the label Cav Imp much later with his friend and fellow Bape alum, Toby Feltwell. So there is that. And it doesn't end there. Skate Thing has worked with nearly every major fashion brand in Japan, and has since become the poster child for Japanese graphic design, inspiring others to take up the same mantle as he, most notably the second son of this era's Urahara, Verdi. Far and wide, one of the most important individuals in the Japanese Urahara movement, Skate Thing is more than just a legend, he's basically an institution in and of himself. While we associate Jun Takahashi more with the runway than the Urahara today, Jun by all accounts is Mr. Urahara. He basically did everything his best friend Takahiro Miyashita did and remained independent till this day, and became massively popular. And while more Westerners in the US look at Nigo as the most important Urahara figure, to many in Japan and Europe, Jun Takahashi was what made Japanese fashion unique. His blend of style, culture, DIY approach to fashion was by all accounts the purest form of design. His influences, Vivienne Westwood and Margiela. His primary mentor, Rei Kawakubo, who also pressured him to start his own label. And what happened? His label, Undercover, became the standard of how Japan became arguably the street fashion capital of the world. There's a longer story to be told on why that is, and it will be told, trust me, I'll do that for you. But Jun's contributions to the Urahara movement, at least from a Western perspective, are grossly underappreciated, as even today's labels, brands, and styles take indiscriminately from Jun Takahashi. He's basically Japan's Margiela, and that's not even being hyperbolic. The style that Jun spearheaded became the image of Japanese Urahara, which was equal parts punk, Americana, and a heavy dose of Japanese, and it still prevails today. Nigo, for most individuals who like Japanese fashion, was the catalyst. He's likely the reason you're watching this now, just to see how high he makes it on the list. Don't worry, he's here. He's certainly the most famous Japanese Urahara figure and created the world-famous BAPE in 1993. His story has been told 1,001 times, and we'd be beating a dead horse talking about it again. However, it's important to note that Nigo, unlike many of his contemporaries, was interested in making BAPE huge from jump. He wanted the international acclaim for BAPE, and he recognized the burgeoning growth of hip-hop and fashion. Capitalizing on this movement, Nigo made inroads of staking his own claim to the Urahara. His foresight in seeing where fashion was headed and the relationships he fostered along the way showed a depth of vision that not many have been able to replicate. He's by far and away the most successful Urahara era figure and has the accolades to prove it. He now has the pleasure of lending his talents to several companies, which include Adidas, Uniqlo, and most recently as the creative director of Kenzo. And he still is a major figure, even for Gen Zers, making his ability as a Japanese to be relevant for so long out west commendable to say the least. And finally, Hiroshi Fujiwara, aka the godfather of them all. Now let's be real here. Street fashion, or streetwear, or whatever the hell you want to call it, I call it street fashion, was started in the US. So why in the hell is a Japanese dude coined as the godfather of streetwear? Well, for a few reasons, but one major reason is how Hiroshi elevated what street fashion is. By gathering and mentoring nearly everyone on this list, he was able to have his fingers on the pulse of nearly every subculture like no other tastemaker before him, be they from Japan or another place. You see, because in the West, particularly in the United States, subcultures were divided and splintered. Skaters were skaters, b-boys, b-boys, etc., etc. There was some crossover, but not as much as you see today. But on the island of Japan, it was natural for these subcultures to intermingle and cross-reference. But Hiroshi Fujiwara's response was to mentor and inspire specialists in each respective subculture to pave their own way and add a little bit more Japaneseness to those interests and be more consistent instead of the hodgepodge that was predictable at the time. They were excited. It's a lot of energy. But what's important is he didn't try to do it all. He found the people who were best suited to do it. And that's what makes him so important. Instead of claiming it all, he built a kingdom and established fiefdoms, all of which he had his fingers on. He may not be the most known or celebrated, but he is certainly the most important. Without him, all of street fashion or streetwear would be much different, and you can't really say that about any other individual given the time period at which he did it. What's more, people east and west repeat the same sentiment. It was Fujiwara, they say, and that's about as much a cosign as anything. That ain't me, that's other people. And those are the 10 Urahara fashion legends you should know that changed everything. And remember, this is just Urahara, not all of fashion. But that obviously comes with a question. Who do you feel was missing from this list? Or which of these individuals do you feel was the most important to you and inspires you the most, and why? Let it be known in the comments. And if you want extra content, access to our private Discord, or you just want to support what we do here, join us on Patreon to gain access to all of that and more. And if you're looking to build a fashion label, brand, or startup, join us at our higher tiers to get access to our monthly fashion business workshop, webinar, class. That was a lot. But class is dope. You should definitely check it out, filled with individuals who are doing some of the same things that you are if you're building a brand. But most importantly, keep it locked right here for all of your info in international fashion culture and business from Tokyo. It's your boy, and keep it casual. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. And I will see you guys in a minute.